something that I learned a long time ago when I worked at Bloomingdale's. Arnold Scazi's name used to be Arnold Isaacs, and he didn't like it, so he spelled Isaacs backwards and got Scazi. Probably a little known fact about Arnold Scazi, but it's really beautiful. It has almost like a peplum bottom to it. She looks stunning.
We also noticed the Chinese premier shaking hands enthusiastically with the guests. So far in press reports, he's been getting high marks for his affability. In his first day here, he jumped one of the security lines to go introduce himself to members of the press corps who were covering him, and a change from some of the formality of Chinese leaders.
Well, he evidently has quite a sense of humor. I think in the press conference, he was asking for forgiveness at the beginning that he wasn't quite as good as dealing with the press as the president was, but he hoped that they would like him. You'll also notice over the premier's shoulder is an interpreter, and I believe there's also one by Madame Lau. There should be. Each one of them would have their own interpreter for the entire evening so that they can ask questions and completely understand what's going on. You're looking right now at a longtime friend of the Clintons, William LaRock, I believe from California, with his wife Star, if I'm seeing this correctly. It looks like it's a longtime friend from California.
Do the Clintons generally mix in a few old friends?
They do have a few friends, and they're just some longtime supporters. I mean, I noticed tonight there were a number of longtime supporters in here. Bill LaRock is one, Ron Burkell is another one, Tom Lee that I saw on the list was another one, and Herb Miller, I believe from Indianapolis. They're just people that the Clintons have known for years.
All right, we'll just listen in for a few more minutes.
He deserved it.
Ms. Audrey Yu, Mr. David Chang.
Very good. Very good.
Mr. and Mrs. Maurice Greenberg.
No, it was wonderful. It's such a good time.
You know this.
Nice to see you. Thank you so much.
Brian, Mr. Shelby. Mr. and Mrs. Patrick McGovern.
Person in the McGovern's announced twice. What does that indicate?
Probably that they're trying to speed the line along just a little bit. That's a second announce. Or it also may be the president can actually hear the names when they're announced. So it's sometimes helpful if he isn't seeing who was announced. But it's probably, let's move the line along just a little bit.
We were talking a little bit off camera, and you recalled a receiving line story from dinners past.
Well, the one that I thought was stunning was Sophia Loren and her husband Carlo Ponte went through the line for the Italian state dinner, and she had on the most glorious Armani ball gown that I've ever seen. And her husband was actually talking to the president and didn't turn to see where he's walking. And it was right when the bustles, or not the bustles, the trains, the small trains came into popularity. And he stepped on the back of her train, and she really almost reeled backwards. And, you know, he finally stepped off of it, and she moved on, and it didn't pull her dress apart, but he did step on the back of her train. We were also just talking about, this is more than the middle of the night for them, and I think we were talking about where they were staying, and they actually stay at Blair House, which is the president's official guest house, which is right across the street. And it was redone in the Reagan years. It had fallen on not disrepair, but it just wasn't as nice as it should be. And now it's like staying in probably one of the finest small little hotels in the world. And it's run by the State Department. And a woman named Mrs. Valentina actually runs the house. And a lot of the heads of state know her and are delighted when they come back to the United States and can stay at Blair House.
There's a 12 or 13-hour time difference between here and the Chinese capital, which means it is tomorrow morning for the Chinese premier and his wife, and they've been up throughout the night in their time frame and still have a lot of hours ahead of them.
As I say, the other thing that you'll see at the end of this receiving line is the entire Chinese delegation should go through the receiving line at the end. So we'll see, I think it's probably 14 people, I believe, in the official delegation will go through at the very end of the receiving line.
Where's the Vice President and Mrs. Gore?
I actually don't know where he is tonight because they're usually here. I'm surprised he's not here.
Excuse me. How many members of the cabinet were invited tonight?
I didn't count the number, but I can tell you some of the ones that are here. Let's see, we went through, and who did you and I see go through? We saw Madeleine Albright. Sandy Berger's not a member of the cabinet, but the head of the National Security Council. Bill Daley, who's the Commerce Secretary.
Bill Richardson.
Bill Richardson, Secretary Glickman, the Secretary of Agriculture. We haven't seen him come through yet, but our UN Ambassador Designate, Dick Holbrook, and his wife, Cathy Martin, are there. We saw Arthur Levitt, the head of the SEC. We haven't seen John Podesta, who's the President's Chief of Staff, and his wife yet, but they should be there. I think that's...
So obviously not all cabinet members invited to every...
No, and again, probably we'd have to go back and look at who was on the last dinner list, but it also has to do with the issues that were being discussed. You see the Secretary of Agriculture, the Secretary of Energy. I believe the Vice President had an environmental and an energy meeting today. So a lot of the secretaries that are there are based on the issues that have actually been discussed today.
Let's take a break from our conversation. We'll listen in again. The official dinner that is honoring the Chinese Premier, Rongji, who is visiting Washington for 3 days, part of an 8-day trip to the United States. We are going to continue watching the receiving line as it progresses. 210 guests invited to tonight's dinner in the East Room at the White House. And then in a few minutes, the official toast of the evening. So if you've just joined us, we're in progress of a full night of diplomacy and festivity in the nation's capital.
If you live in western Colleton County, be prepared to take cover immediately. A tornado warning is in effect for you.
But it is just, it's a question of, will they pick up the time and be in there seated, ready to go, or is he going to count on being 25 minutes late? And right now he's doing a lot of consultation with Capricia Marshall and the chief usher to find out how many poor people are in the receiving line, how fast they can get people seated. Again, you have to move President and Mrs. Clinton and the Premier and his wife into the East Room, and you also have to reposition the press for the toast. So it doesn't move as quickly as you might like. It's a very planned, well-orchestrated move, but people are pedaling right now as fast as they can to see what the real time is.
Do they ever happen right on time? Is it always a factor?
Actually, it just simply depends. When you're really moving, this is a lot of people to move, and they're doing it quite efficiently and quite nicely. But realistically, people are talking to both the President and the Premier, and so that is slowing them down just a wee bit. But that's actually something you want to have happen. I mean, that's one of the reasons you do this. So it's taking just a little bit longer.
The guests, as they leave the receiving line, are then going in to find their place in the East Room. We saw earlier the table set up, and the tablecloths and the plates, the Reagan china selected by the First Lady for tonight's dinner. What about making the decisions about who sits with whom?
Excellent question. The first go-round on that is usually done, well, actually, when you put the guest list together, you get a sense from the President and Mrs. Clinton of who they know. They start talking about some people who might be good to be seated together.
There's Bill Richardson, by the way, the
Absolutely.
Energy Secretary.
This is the Energy Secretary, just going through. They talk a little bit about who they think might be good to seat together. The first stab at the seating is usually done by the social secretary. Sometimes she will call in other people to take a look at it, to give advice. It's done, as far as seating our Chinese guests this evening, it's done in a very protocol rank order, as is our cabinet. And then you go from there. I mean, the way that I would actually always do it would be to seat the guests of the foreign guests, then to seat our official ranking people, and then to go from there and really start to put it together. Then you really do have a sit down with President and Mrs. Clinton, sometimes together, sometimes separately, to go over the dinner list. They have very good eyes, and they know people extremely well, and they know personalities that they can suggest of people being seated together. Just watching Mark Knoller from CBS go through the receiving line. Has covered the White House for CBS Radio for quite some time. I think back starting with the Jimmy Carter administration, he's been in and out of the White House at CBS Radio. But you do have active involvement from both the President and the First Lady on the seating. And as I was saying, they have excellent judgment and know people very well, and they're very intuitive about putting people together that they think would like each other. I mean, the President one time had a friend of his called Kinky Friedman, who's an author, be seated with Sherry Lansing, who was a head of a major studio, because he thought Kinky's book should be turned into a movie. So sometimes there's a little bit of matchmaking in that way done too, but they really do spend time thinking about this so that we give great pleasure to every guest that's there that night.
After the receiving line, the next part in the process will be the official toast by the President and the Premier, and this process, and we can talk a little bit more detail about it, but sometimes is a little controversial.
It is a little controversial. It's supposed to be designed to toast. I think that usually they're done in 2 to 3 minutes. Sometimes. A lot of times it goes on to be a speech of 5 to 10 to 12 minutes.
With a little politics.
Sometimes a lot of politics and a lot of issues. And I mean, there are also, you'll notice sometimes there are ways to make points by doing it with a sense of humor, but listen closely always to the toast, because there is great significance behind that. I think if you listen to the arrival ceremony statements in the morning and listen to the toast, even without listening to the press conference, you'll get a good sense of what's going on and what the issues are that we're working on with that country.
By the way, our goal tonight is to show you the diplomatic side of Washington, D.C. and the social side and the nexus with business and the economy in this country. That's what this is all about here, a chance to see not just the daily press conferences and seminars and hearings that go on, but also this aspect of how Washington works. A little bit later on in our coverage tonight, you'll see coverage of today's press conference with the President and the Premier, so we return to some of the big issues that are on their plates. Once again, we'll return and listen in to the receiving line as the President and the Premier greet guests.
The Honorable James Steinberg and Ms. Sherburne Abbott. The Honorable James Steinberg, Ms. Sherburne Abbott. Professor and Mrs. Michael Oxenberg. Mr. and Mrs. Chris Galvin. Mr. and Mrs. Chris Galvin.
Rockefeller of West Virginia, one of 2 U.S. senators here
I
tonight.
misspoke earlier. I said one, and Max Baucus is here.
Right behind him is Rick Boucher, actually Frederick Boucher, who is a Democratic congressman from the state of Virginia. His guest is Wendy Cronin.
People, there are 12 people, I believe, that are with the Premier, plus the ambassador, and I believe his wife is with him, but I actually haven't seen them yet.
Let's go back to table seating. Is the idea to mix the delegation among the guests of the dinner?
The idea is to mix the delegation among the guests, and there's one at each of the 14 tables, so you would not put several of them together.
What about interpretation?
Well, if they do not speak any English, they're either going to be seated close to somebody who speaks fluent Chinese, or there will be an interpreter there for them.
Who doesn't get a seat at the table?
Who doesn't get a seat at the table? Well, actually, will probably sit right behind them, although it would be fairly crowded in the East Room, so that would be, you'd have to work to get that done. But my guess is a number of them speak English, and obviously the social secretaries found that out and would have seated people accordingly because of that.
210 people. Are there 10 guests at each table?
There should be 10 guests at each table, although once in a while there might be 11, but they try to keep it absolutely at 10.
Is there a head table?
There is not a head table this time. The previous one there was a head table because part of that was Jimmy Carter was here, the former First Lady, Lady Bird Johnson, was here, and so they did have a head table that I believe had 12 people at it. Here comes Secretary Albright, is close to the last person through the receiving line with her guest, and actually may be the last person through the receiving line.
And obviously wearing a Chinese-inspired
Chinese, and that is the end of the receiving line, and what you're seeing happen right now is the President is escorting his guests into the Blue Room for about a minute or two hold while everyone gets seated and while the press comes in and is repositioned to do the toast. And then they'll be announced into the state dining room and the dinner will officially begin.
That's Capricia Marshall, who is the current social secretary at the White House, closing the doors there to the Blue Room. Do you miss it as you watch this?
Oh, I miss the people, and I miss, on a night like this, I love to look at it, but I love what I'm doing right now, but I sure miss the people. The White House staff, both the political staff that is appointed, but especially the resident staff, whom the social secretary works so closely with, are really extraordinary people that carry over administration to administration. They're led by the chief usher, Gary Walters. And it's a lot of the people you met today, the florist, the chef, the wine steward, the butlers, everybody that you work with.
How late is the night for the guests? What time will people be leaving, usually?
I would guess that they'll probably pick up a little bit of time here, and one of the nice things about tonight is that they're doing the entertainment actually in the East Room where people are having dinner. So there's a small stage in one corner, and so they will not have to move people again to entertainment. So when the entertainment is over, they'll get up and go into the grand foyer for dancing, but my guess is by probably 11:30, 12 o'clock at the latest, most people will be starting to head home.
I know people have been joining us along the way. We have some videotape of the East Room that we're going to show, and have you talk a little bit about the room once again that this event is in tonight.
Right. This is the East Room, and again, I think once your guests, your viewers see this, was done earlier today, and you're looking at the red damask tablecloth with the Reagan china, which is the wide-bordered red china, and you're looking at the spring flowers, which are parrot, tulips, and poppies, and a variety of different flowers. Very, very springtime feeling. It's beautiful. I think that the difference you'll notice is once you have a shot during the toast, the room, the lights are down, the room is lit, it's night, and when you see these two portraits of George and Martha Washington peering over the room, it really does give you goosebumps.
Do you ever have any, in the years that you were there, any folks that you just had to say, time to go, folks? They were enjoying the evening so much they didn't want to leave?
Well, I always would walk up to people and laughingly say, show me the way to go home. and actually, they sort of know. Once you get down to 30 or 40 people, people really start to leave. It also depends on when the President and First Lady leave. There used to be an unwritten rule that you didn't leave the White House until the President and First Lady went upstairs. Well, this President and First Lady love people so much that they often stay till pretty much some of the last guests leave. So people do start to slip out even if the President is still there sometimes.
We're going to listen to some more of the music. This is a rehearsal from earlier today as the three musicians chosen for tonight's entertainment practiced. As you can see, the lights went out and the guests will be enjoying their dinner. by candlelight there in the East Room at the White House. This is the official dinner for the visit of the Chinese Premier Rongji. Ann Stock has been watching the evening with us. Ann Stock, former social secretary at the White House. You have seen many official toasts over the years. How did these two stack up?
Well, you had consecutive translations, or consecutive translations, so it's probably 15, 16, 17 minutes plus, probably 15 minutes plus the translation. So I can guarantee you right now that the food is coming out of the green room probably as fast as they can start to do that. People are probably pretty hungry, but it went well. I thought the toasts were both warm and generous from both of them, even spontaneous on the Premier's part. I think the President really looked to the future but noted the differences between them. You heard the Premier talk about the strategic partnership and a friendship. The thing that I noted was that he said that he had been where President Roosevelt did the fireside chats, and also where in the Lincoln bedroom to see the Emancipation Proclamation, which means that the President took him on a tour of the upstairs residence to really show them the house, so to give him a flavor of where all of our American presidents have lived. And there's no better person to do a tour. He's a great historian and knows everything there is to know about every detail of the White House and the President. So I thought it went quite well.
Ann Stock, thank you for all the preparation you did to help our viewers understand how these official dinners work.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
One of the persons who is very nervous at this point, the official dinner an hour behind schedule, lots of hungry guests, but an executive chef who's trying to make it all work. Earlier today, we talked to the chef about what the menu would be like, and as the guests are now eating at the White House, we'll let you listen in to the description of their dinners.
This evening, Mrs. Clinton selected the following table setting to express the exuberance of spring and also to honor the Premier and Madame Lau. She selected certain colors, certain designs, and certain foods to honor the Premier, the colors of their flag, the foods that they both prefer, and some of the new tastes that she would like to introduce them to. I would like Nancy Clark here, the chief florist, to describe a bit of the cloth and the place settings that were chosen and the beautiful centerpiece.
Well, Mrs. Clinton chose a deep rose-colored tablecloth, which is a rose dante damask. And then we are using the Reagan china, which is a red china with a gold band, and the Vermeil flatware. The centerpieces are filled with red tulips. It's a red parrot tulip, a red and yellow tulip. And the interesting thing about these tulips is with the warmth in the room, the tulips will actually move during the evening. They'll open and close and move back and forth. And she also chose the yellow tulip. So we're doing just a hint of spring in these arrangements, but we're coordinating with everything that the chef is doing and that the pastry chef is doing.
We also learned through protocol that the Premier and Madame Lau prefer lots of fresh vegetables and as well fish and seafood. And so I'd like Mr. Walter Scheib to describe this evening's menu.
Well, that worked out very well because this is a beautiful time of the year for the tremendous bounty of fresh vegetables, both cultivated and wildly gathered, that we're featuring this evening. On the first course, we have a nice piece of chicken, but it has what makes it unique is that we have Vidalia onions, which are great this time of year, and we've cooked them down and reduced them down and reduced them down until they get to be almost a paste, and it's a beautiful, sweet, oniony flavor that's spread on this chicken, and the chicken is grilled. And it's served with Oregon morels that are just brand new this year. They're tiny little ones that are just coming up out of the ground. On top of that, we have fiddlehead ferns, which are also a harbinger of spring in the north-central United States and southern Canada. We have something new that I hadn't seen before that was brought to my attention, something called bioasparagus, which grows, as you would denote, in Louisiana. It isn't really an asparagus at all. It's a vine shoot, actually. And I guess the genus name is Smilax, S-M-I-L-A-X, and it's commonly known as catbrier or greenbrier. And the shoots, the last couple inches of these things before they get woody and viney, are very, very tasty, sort of like an asparagus, but a little bit lighter in texture, not quite so bitter as the asparagus, and interesting texture. They're all tendrils, and as you would expect on a vine. So that was something we hadn't seen before. On the entree, as Capricia was saying, there has been a request for seafood, so we went out and found out what was the best this time of year. And what we found is that out of Oregon is a hook and line caught silver salmon, which is staging for its annual spawning run up the rivers in Oregon. So this is the time of the year when the flesh is the richest of it because it's been feeding its sea all year, and it's ready to come in to do its spawn, so it won't feed anymore. So this is its peak. On top of that, we've brought in from China, it's something I hadn't seen either before, was truffles. Everybody's familiar with French truffles and Italian truffles. It turns out that China also raises truffles, and we had some of those brought in, and they've turned out to be very, very interesting products. So we'll probably be using those more in the future. As well as that, on the salmon, we'll take a blood orange reduction, which is red oranges that'll be reduced down to a syrup, and they'll be glazed on the back of the salmon to give it a richer flavor. The sauce that'll go with that will be more typically a red meat course sauce, if you will, because we're having a beautiful red wine tonight. The sauce itself is made out of fish reduction, but it's also combined with veal glaze, so it's a brown sauce. It's got red wine in it, it's got orange reduction in it, so it's a very interesting multi-layered sauce, and so I think it's going to go very, very well with the salmon and at the same time match up with the red wine. The salad, we have mosh greens, dandelions, fresh corn sprouts. We have a variety of wild salads that are also out of Washington State. So again, some of the things that have been gathered, some of the things that have been cultivated. And I think it's going to be a very, very interesting salad. To go with that, we have layered Maytag blue cheese from Iowa that's layered with port wine poached pears, and there's a port wine vinaigrette that goes with that. So we've got the kind of lightly bitter greens, crunchy, and then this beautiful soft cheese that we have to go along with the red wine pears. It's going to be a great menu.
And we move from the White House chef to introduce you to Roland Meisner, who is the White House pastry chef, who will tell you about the desserts at tonight's official dinner for the Chinese premier.
This is an orange sherbet ring, which is filled on the inside with a Chinese tea frozen parfait. The tea came in from China this Sunday, was brought to me by another chef friend, which was very nice to have at this time. The background of the dessert is a little painting of kind of spring in China, which have the bamboo and the bird here and the water lily on the side here. And then around the dessert on the base, we have a kumquat, a glazed kumquat tartlet. And the dessert will be served with an almond brittle sauce, which is kind of a fluffy, light sauce with almond brittle on top of it, and fresh raspberry. And now Frenette will explain to you the petit four.
We have 3 different kinds of petit fours tonight. This one is a little more unusual, a typical Chinese delicacy. It's a mango pudding. Here we have an almond brittle tartlet filled with a mixture of bitter chocolate and coconut milk. And the little swan cookie here is made out of an almond cookie.
How much work goes into this?
Well, the preparation started about 4 days ago, mainly on the planing, on the make sure that all the flavor are well balanced together. Our main concern was the orange sherbet and the tea. Will the orange sherbet be too strong for the tea? But having such a beautiful, strong tea from China, with a very, very delicate perfume and everything else, goes very well with the orange, actually. They blend very, very well. It's the first time we have tried that, and it really was a great success, those 2 flavors together. And then the painting and everything else took quite a while here, so it's 3 days of work at least, and a few more hours. We don't count, though, we just do it.
And it's all edible?
It's all edible, yes, of course. Nothing else but yes.
And with that note, we conclude our coverage of tonight's official dinner from the White House as Washington, D.C. welcomes the Chinese Premier, Rongji.